Okay, guys, so we are back on lesson 2 of remote learning, which is Thursday's lesson. I do appreciate sometimes with the in-between moments of a lesson, if you didn't quite get to the end of lesson 1 and with lesson 2, what I'm going to ask is that your homework this week, okay, your reflection work this week, I know we don't have shown my homework, so I will put it in an email to confirm, is to just spend time reviewing, rewatching, ensuring that any of the activities that you've been asked to do across lesson 1 and 2 are completed for next week, okay? Just so that we're all coming back into the classroom, in theory, on the same page. Okay, so we are in the world of social diversity. We are introducing and building to secure key ideas, concepts, and theories relating to this topic of social diversity. And ideally, what we're going to achieve today is a little bit of review of what we did yesterday, and we're going to introduce us to our number 1, our first theory, accommodation theory. Now, that question then that we're really going to be able to pin our ideas back to, and a little disclaimer, it becomes the question of our first essay that we'll do, is to what extent do social factors determine a person's use of language? So yesterday we introduced some key concepts and some key terminology around this. We defined social factors, we defined social groups, we defined extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. I'm going to do a review of that in a minute, but I just want us to remember that this key question, to what extent do social factors determine a person's use of language, is our overarching question. It's our big question. And at the end of this series of lessons, even when I'm back in class, this is the same question that we're going to be building up to answering in a more kind of academic essay. So we had some questions yesterday from the previous lesson. Now, your job at the end of yesterday's lesson was to answer these questions. If you didn't quite get there because of time, you're about to cheat. But what I would say is use these to create a set of Quizlet cards. Okay? It's a really good way to use Quizlet to kind of return to our work. So these were our 10 questions at the end of yesterday's lesson. It was, again, to remind us that quizzing questions is one of the best ways to secure knowledge. And this is just to go through a mark. Now, I do appreciate there can be variation in answers. So if your answer is slightly different, but you can see that it's within the same concept area, give it a tick. If you need me to check, I will be back with you next week. So we said, what do we mean by social factors? So what do we mean by social factors? So social factors are the facts and experiences that influence your personality, lifestyle, and attitudes. Okay? Now, there was that diagram that suggested that those factors and experiences, so you could have said social factors include religion, beliefs, attitudes, education, demographics. In itself, it is a big concept, but social factors are fundamentally the facts and experiences that influence personality. So number 2, what is the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation? So intrinsic motivation comes from the inside, it's the internal drive. Extrinsic motivation comes from outside influences. So the big difference is inside, outside, internal, external motivation. Brilliant. So what is a social group? 2 or more people that interact with one another. That's the really simple definition, isn't it? 2 or more people that interact with each other based on shared social factors, facts and experiences that influence their personality, lifestyle, and attitudes. But we know, we built up to this recognition, particularly for the A grade, that understanding that as a more complex set of groups, the 4 set of groups, is really important for us. So a subculture, it's a social. So what's a social subculture? What is a subculture? Well, it's a social group within the larger culture that are at odds with that larger culture. So they have attitudes and beliefs that are at odds with it. So which social group has a primary focus on learning? So these questions are getting you to think about those 4 groups. So communities of practice, their primary focus is learning. Brilliant. If people were meeting as part of a church group, would they be a discourse community or a social network? So they're part of a church group. There you go. They're a discourse community. They've got shared values and beliefs. They've got shared discourses, and they're meeting to use language to kind of like achieve those goals. Would people meeting online to learn a new skill be part of a subculture or a community of practice? Brilliant. Community of practice. It's all linked to this idea of learning skills. Okay, now we could broaden that and say that potentially then is going to introduce them to a social network. Because when I was thinking like meeting online, that could be I belong to the OU, the Open University. I'm meeting online to learn a new skill, a new qualification. That's my community of practice. When I've completed that, I will come out of that group. However, it could be a social network because I could be belonging to the online group. I could make a study group with people on the course from me. I could meet and have to email my professor. So therefore, you're building up a bigger social network. Okay, so is a social network made up of one or many groups? There you go. It's a many group thing. So the social network is this network word. It's our key word. It's like creating a spider web, a web of connections, connecting me to many groups and organizations. So actually, the Open University is the institution, the organization. Within that, I will be networked with individuals. I might say to 3 people I've met online, let's form a study group. I might be meeting with a tutor. I might be meeting with a lecturer. So there's my social network. Now, would a subculture follow the norms of mainstream society or not? No, they wouldn't. So a subculture does not follow the norms of mainstream society. They are counterculture. And could a person belong to more than one of these groups? Could you give an example to illustrate? Okay, so yes, absolutely, you can belong to more than one group. In school, you're part of a community of practice, but your friendship groups may be subcultures. And when you go home and you use Instagram and Facebook, that's making you part of a social network. Brilliant. So give yourself a mark out of 10. Any of those answers you didn't get, or if you didn't get to this part of the lesson and I've given you all the answers, you can just use a very similar, you can copy those exactly and create a Quizlet, your first set of Quizlet cards to revise social topic, social diversity, and or you could change them slightly, but that's exactly what we're looking for with Quizlet. Short answers, short questions. You could argue that these questions themselves actually are a little bit long. You could reduce them down, but there's your first set of Quizlet cards. Okay, so try and recreate the map of different social groups using your own words to summarize or paraphrase the information. So I know you've done this before, but the reason we're doing it again, hello revision. When you do something more than once, when we practice something, okay, it is easy. It becomes easier. So what keywords might go in the middle of social groups? How would we complete communities of, social ends, DCs, subs? So just give yourself, I'm going to say pause the video in a minute and just give yourself 3 minutes. Now, ideally, see what you can do from memory. See, now in these boxes at this stage, it doesn't have to be full sentences, but it could be anything you remember. So communities of practice are all about learning. You could write that in your first box. So 3 minutes to see what you're remembering at this stage. Off you go, guys. 3 minutes. Okay, so 3 minutes later, you've done a map. Now, ideally, you want to get to the place when in a few lessons time, you can do that map in about 3 minutes with lots of detail, but we're just at the beginning of that process, okay? So there is no stress. The ideal thing at this stage is to know the names of the groups, okay? And one keyword or idea about them. So subcultures at odds with society, discourse communities, common goals, using language to achieve those goals, communities of practice, all about the learning, social networks, multiple groups working together. The social groups in the middle, if you can remember those words, enacting, characteristics, performative would be brilliant. Okay, my lovelies, so that's a revision from last week. Now we're moving into the learning for today. Brilliant. So like I was saying, that's a really good way just to revise. Okay, now what are we looking at today then? Well, we're building on this knowledge of theory and concepts. We've recognized that social factors and dynamics of social groups are complex. In other words, who I interact with, whether within a community of practice or a subculture, as a part of a DIS community or social network, will mean that I will use language, whether it's written, spoken, or blended mode, to build those relationships, to strengthen connections and communicate effectively and efficiently in order to achieve the purpose of those interactions. My intrinsic motivation fundamentally will be to be understood by you, which we call intelligibility, whilst also trying to be me, identity. So actually, although intrinsic motivation is bigger, we can distill it to these two things. Most people's internal drive and desire is that they want to be understood by other people, and we call that intelligibility, whether or not I am understood by other people. Whilst I'm also trying to be me, I'm also trying to be true to who I am, to my identity. Now, we can often see at the root of lots of conflicts where those things break down. Often people find themselves frustrated or angry or isolated when others don't understand them. We often hear that, that cry in films and TVs, you just don't understand me. When we feel misunderstood, it can cause us in our humanity to be really frustrated. Okay? Similarly, when we feel that we're not allowed to be who we really want to be, when we find that there's something that curbs our identity, or that whilst we're trying to be ourselves, other people reject that, creates tensions for us. So again, a complex issue. So my intrinsic motivation is to be understood by you, intelligibility, whilst also being able to be me, true to my identity. However, tension arises as extrinsic motivation may be at odds with my own motivation. In other words, who I want to be, how I want to use language may go against the standards and norms set by society. And that creates tension. That creates opposition and friction between myself, who I want to be, how I want to use language, and the world around me. So, as human beings, I have to resolve the tension between wanting to be me. So I might want to swear. I might want to use slang. I want to speak in my own accent. But if I do that, if I'm true to being me in school, not so much maybe with slang and using my own accent, if I was to swear in a class, if I was to use taboo language out of context, I could lose my job. So we're reminded here that actually in order to be understood, I have to perform a certain way. So as your teacher, to be understood, I have to speak clearly. I have to use proper English. So I don't sound so ... So there is this ongoing tension all the time within society. I want to be me. I want to be true to my identity, but sometimes that will be at odds with the world around me. And the decision becomes, do I stay true to myself and be rejected by society, or do I adapt who I am and be accepted? And it's this tension and its impact on society that has attracted the attention of research and study, as key people have got involved in trying to explain and resolve the issue. So we've got lots of people across all of A-level language that represent key people who are trying to explain and resolve the issues around language, offering their own contribution to the ongoing discussion. So for us, we're going to look at a series of theorists over the next few lessons who help work out this question. Do social factors influence language? And is that a good thing? So a little bit just of a stopgap here, something we need to know about the mark scheme in paper 2. Knowledge of the theory then, so the information we're going to start giving today. So we've looked at concepts. So social factor is a concept. Intrinsic, extrinsic motivation is a concept. Theory is actually the ideas and contributions that individuals make to our understanding of the language issue. Now, knowledge of theory and concepts comes under the umbrella of what we call AO2 on the mark scheme, and it is crucial for all tasks across paper 2. So in each exam paper in each exam task you respond to in paper 2, there are marks awarded for your knowledge and application of theory. And this knowledge, therefore, has to be more than superficial. It has to be more than name dropping. And by refining your knowledge of theory, you can bridge across grade boundaries quite quickly. It's a really lovely, transparent mark scheme that they use in A-level language. So we can do certain things for a C, certain things for a B, certain things for an A. Now, each topic, I always work to the formula to make it a tangible thing so that you can really get your head and hands around that we want to know for a C grade 3 theorists in depth. Okay, so we fundamentally start by introducing you to 3 theorists in depth. Now, those 3 theorists are not the only theorists associated with the topic. Okay, there are more than 3, and we will cover more than 3. But you begin to say to yourself, well, I'm aiming for a C, my target's a C, so I only need to know 3 of the 5, 6, 7, 8 theorists that Mrs. taught us. However, bridging to the B and the A is dependent on knowing a greater variety of those theories. So that means you will need to know and explain who a theorist is, what they contribute, how they arrived at that contribution, at that conclusion, and why it's significant. You also, now this is so important, need to be able to illustrate each model and theory with specific examples and place those examples in context. So for a C grade, for a theorist, who are they, what were they doing, how and why, and can I illustrate? To bridge to the B and the A, you need to be able to offer alternative interpretations. So we use tentative and open language. We need to be able to evaluate the strengths and the weaknesses of a theory. It is okay not to agree with a theorist. We don't have to just assume they're right because we're studying them. And we want a conceptualized understanding about how different factors can contribute to language use. Now, a conceptualized understanding is really the ability to bring lots of the theoretical ideas together under bigger conceptual headings. Now, all of that, 3, 4 to 5, are A grade characteristics that we start to still think about quite early on.